Just 4,500 fans showed up at the Lindner Family Tennis Center. Then Alex Eala stepped onto the court, and the entire tournament was turned upside down. The WTA watched in stunned silence as a player who had sold out 12,500 seats in Toronto arrived in Cincinnati with the power to fill an 11,614-seat stadium, or expose the emptiness of an event that had lost its biggest stars. Can one player single-handedly save a tournament? And what happens when she does? The numbers were supposed to tell a story of growth. The $260 million renovation had doubled the size of the Lindner Family Tennis Center. The tournament had expanded from 1 week to 12 days, from 56 players draws to 96. And yet, when the gates opened in Cincinnati, the WTA was staring at a problem that no amount of construction could fix. Just 4,500 fans had shown up. The contrast with Toronto was jarring. Just weeks earlier, the National Bank Open had shattered attendance records with over 215,000 fans packing Sobeys Stadium. Driven largely by the Eala effect that had turned the Canadian tournament into a Filipino homecoming. In Montreal, despite rain and canceled sessions, the men's event still sold 309,000 tickets. But in Cincinnati, the seats remained empty. The tournament that had been named ATP Masters 1000 Tournament of the Year following its stunning transformation was struggling to fill its new stadiums. The 11,614-seat center court, the crown jewel of the $260 million renovation that had expanded the grounds from 20 to 40 acres, sat with vast swaths of empty seats. The grandstand court, with its 5,000 capacity, was barely half full, and the absence of top names only made the problem worse. Jannik Sinner had withdrawn with a knee injury. Novak Djokovic had collapsed in the oppressive Ohio heat, struggling with the 96% humidity. Carlos Alcaraz was still sidelined with a wrist injury, his return uncertain even for the U.S. Open. The tournament that had once attracted 285,571 fans in 2025 was now facing an attendance crisis. The heat, long a complaint at the uncovered Lindner Family Tennis Center, had become unbearable. Spectators had collapsed due to lack of shade, players had retired mid-match, and fans who had spent $300 on tickets and driven 5 hours were left feeling cheated. The very bad heat. From spectators collapsing due to lack of cover to players unable to play their best, this is a problem that will get worse, one review read. But then, Alex Eala arrived. The 21-year-old from Quezon City, seeded number 17 and already the hottest player on tour, stepped onto the court and the entire tournament was turned upside down. The Filipino fans who had followed her from Washington to Toronto now arrived in Ohio. They paid upwards of $1,000 on the resale market just to get a seat. They flooded the ticket office with inquiries, with 80% of all requests asking about her match schedule. They turned the Lindner Family Tennis Center into a sea of Philippine flags. What had been 4,500 empty seats was about to become a stadium that felt like Manila. The WTA watched in stunned silence as a player who had sold out 12,500 seats in Toronto arrived in Cincinnati with the power to fill an 11,614-seat stadium, or expose the emptiness of an event that had lost its biggest stars. And as Amanda Anisimova the world know, 10, who was supposed to have the home court advantage, prepared to face Eala, she already knew the truth. I know that it's probably going to be a very packed stadium. What would you do if a player ranked outside the top 5 could fill a stadium that the world's best couldn't? For the Cincinnati Open organizers, the answer was becoming clear. They would ride the Filipino wave. They would move Eala's match to the biggest court. And they would hope that the Eala effect could save a tournament that seemed to be losing its way. Because when Alex Eala plays, even Cincinnati can feel like Manila. The numbers told a story that the WTA couldn't ignore. Just 4,500 fans had shown up in Cincinnati. Then Alex Eala arrived, and the entire equation changed. The resale market exploded. Ticket prices spiked to $1,000, and an 11,614-seat stadium that had been half empty suddenly felt like it was in Manila. The Eala effect had already transformed Toronto, where the National Bank Open shattered attendance records with over 215,000 fans packing Sobeys Stadium. In Washington, Her ticket sales had risen by at least 80%. Now, Cincinnati was learning the same lesson that every tournament Eala visited had discovered. When she plays us, the Filipino community shows up. The demand was so overwhelming that organizers were forced to move her match to a larger venue. Tournament officials confirmed that the original court assignment simply couldn't hold the crowd that was coming. Citation 3-7. The fourth capacity venue, where her second-round match had been scheduled, was overwhelmed by ticket inquiries. The decision to shift Eala to the bigger stadium was swift and decisive, a recognition that the 21-year-old from Quezon City had become the tournament's biggest draw. "I've never seen anything like this," tournament director Bob Moran admitted, according to sources close to the event. The statistics behind the phenomenon were staggering. According to one tournament director, Filipino fans were shelling out upwards of $1,000 on the secondary market just to get a seat, and that 80% of all ticket inquiries were asking about her match schedule. In a tournament featuring Grand Slam champions and the world's best players, the 21-year-old from Quezon City was driving the market. The resale frenzy was just the latest chapter in a story that had been building for weeks. The scenes at the Lindner Family Tennis Center mirrored what had happened in Toronto. Philippine flags filled every section. The chants of Laban, Alex, echoed through the stands with a ferocity that had become the signature of the Eala Mania phenomenon. Fans who had traveled from across the country, some driving 8 hours from Toronto, others planning college reunions around the match, packed the stadium to witness their hero. For the Filipino community, the $1,000 tickets weren't just seats. They were symbols of pride. The fans who had packed Sobeys Stadium in Toronto, who had waved Philippine flags and chanted until their voices gave out, were now doing it all over again in Ohio. The same community that had turned Toronto into Barangay Toronto was now transforming Cincinnati into a homecoming, and they were willing to pay almost any price to be part of it. What would you do if the demand to see you play drove ticket prices to $1,000? For Alex Eala, the answer was simple. She would stay focused on the tennis. She would keep her eyes on the court. And she would let the frenzy unfold around her, because she knew that the $1,000 tickets weren't about her. They were about a community that had found its voice. And that was something no resale market could ever fully capture. The Lindner Family Tennis Center had been transformed. The crowd that had been described as incredible by Eala herself had turned the Ohio venue into something that felt like Manila, and the players on court could feel it. "I know that it's probably going to be a very packed stadium," Amanda Anisimova had said before her match. "I'm sure it will be really fun. The world know." Ten had been warned about the Eala effect. She had seen the videos. She had heard about the flags. But nothing could have fully prepared her for what she was about to walk into. The scenes in Cincinnati mirrored what had happened in Toronto just weeks earlier. Filipino fans had followed Eala from Washington to Toronto and now to Ohio. They packed the stands, waving Philippine flags and roaring after every Eala winner. Posters held high, chants of "Laban! Alex!" echoing through the stadium. The support had become so distinctive that one observer noted, "You may be playing Alex Eala in America, but once the Filipino fans arrive, it can suddenly feel like you're playing her in the Philippines." The lengths fans were going to were extraordinary. One group of friends had planned their college reunion around a trip to Cincinnati specifically to see Eala play. They were based all around the United States, but they chose to reconnect not over a wedding or a holiday, but over a tennis match featuring a player who had become a cultural phenomenon. Another supporter had followed Eala at the National Bank Open in Toronto before making an 8-hour drive to Cincinnati for another chance to see the Filipina star in action. And the ticket prices reflected the demand. According to one tournament director, spectators were coughing up about $1,000 in the resale market just to get a seat. And 80% of all ticket inquiries were asking about her match schedule. In a tournament featuring Grand Slam champions and the world's best players, it was the 21-year-old from Quezon City who was driving the market. For Eala, the support was overwhelming. "I think it's incredible," she said of the Filipino fans who had turned out in Washington, Toronto, and now Cincinnati. "It makes me feel loved. And it makes it more exciting to play here." She had called the atmosphere in Toronto Barangay Toronto, and the nickname had stuck. The tournament director, Carl Hale, had already witnessed the phenomenon firsthand. "Alex is an absolute blessing to the sport of tennis and our tournament," he said. "We saw the momentum build from February in Doha and over the past year. And it really culminated in the week of which every match she played it sold out. What would you do if a community of thousands showed up just to see you play?" For Alex Eala, the answer was simple. She would give them everything she had. She would fight for every point. And she would remind them that their support was the reason she kept going. Because she knew that the Filipino wave wasn't just about filling seats, it was about a community finding its voice on the world's biggest stages, and that voice was only getting louder. The numbers were impossible to ignore. The 21-year-old Filipina had become the single biggest story in North American tennis, and the WTA was finally starting to realize the Eala effect had redefined what it meant to be a draw. The contrast between the empty seats in Cincinnati and the packed stadiums in Toronto was a warning the WTA could no longer dismiss. The Eala effect is real, and it's reshaping the economics of tennis. The pattern has become undeniable. In Toronto, tickets for Eala's matches sold out in under 30 minutes, forcing organizers to move her from a 2,800-seat court to the 10,000-seat center court. Tournament director Carl Hale admitted, "We've never seen a player ranked outside the top 5 have this type of effect." In Washington, tournament chairman Mark Ein revealed that a staggering 80% of ticket inquiries were about Eala. In Cincinnati, the resale market spiked to $1,000 just to get a seat. The numbers don't lie, and neither does the moment. The WTA has been struggling with attendance across North America. The Cincinnati Open, despite its $260 million renovation and expansion from 20 to 40 acres, was facing the same problem that had plagued the tournament for years: empty seats. The heat had become unbearable for fans, the schedule had become a logistical nightmare, and the top names, Jannik Sinner, Novak Djokovic, Carlos Alcaraz, were either injured or unavailable. But Eala had proven she could fill stadiums. In Toronto, the National Bank Open shattered attendance records with over 215,000 fans packing Sobeys Stadium, driven largely by the Eala effect that had turned the Canadian tournament into a Filipino homecoming. In Washington, her ticket sales had risen by at least 80%. And now in Cincinnati, the same community that had turned Toronto into Barangay Toronto was doing it all over again. For the WTA, the math was simple. Eala's presence could turn a struggling tournament into a sellout, but she couldn't be everywhere at once. Jessica Pegula, the world no. Oriente player who had faced Eala twice, acknowledged the phenomenon. "Filipino fans are insane," Pegula said after her DC Open final loss to Eala, referring to the surge in listeners for her podcast after the match. "We're getting, I don't know how many we ended up with, but we definitely got like 4,000 or 5,000 more subscribers after that match," she added. "Even when I was leaving the stadium, they were cheering for me. They're just excited to be there. There's just so much excitement." The Eala effect has even influenced other players. Coco Gauff, who has faced Eala twice, acknowledged the phenomenon after her second-round win in Toronto. "I think I've said this before, and I'll say it again. The demographic that Alex is bringing to the sport of tennis is so important. I think all of us should really embrace that because we're all benefiting from it." What would you do if you had become the biggest draw in tennis without winning a Grand Slam? For Alex Eala, the answer was simple. She would stay focused on the game. She would let the phenomenon unfold around her. And she would keep proving that the girl with ruffled socks and light-up shoes had earned every single fan who packed those stadiums. Because she knew that the WTA couldn't ignore the movement any longer. And when they finally looked up, they would see a sea of Philippine flags. The 4,500 empty seats that had greeted the Cincinnati Open were a warning the WTA couldn't ignore. But when Alex Eala stepped onto the court, the stadium that had been half empty suddenly felt like it was in Manila. And the question that lingered was no longer whether she could fill a stadium, but whether the sport could survive without her. The Eala effect has fundamentally altered the economics of women's tennis. In Toronto, 12,500-seat Sobe Stadium was packed to capacity with Philippine flags, chants of "Laban Alex!" drowning out everything else in Washington. Ticket sales rose by 80%. And now, in Cincinnati, fans were shelling out upwards of $1,000 on the secondary market just to watch her play. The contrast with the rest of the tournament was jarring. While Eala's matches drew sellout crowds, the sessions without her featured rows of empty seats. The tournament that had undergone a $260 million renovation was struggling to fill its new stadiums, and the absence of top names like Jannik Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz only made the problem worse. But one player, a 21-year-old from Quezon City, had proven she could fill 11,614 seats by herself. What the WTA can no longer ignore is the power of the Filipino diaspora. The passion of Filipino fans has turned every tournament into a cultural event. They have followed Eala from Washington to Toronto to Cincinnati, driving 8 hours, planning college reunions, and paying $1,000 for tickets. They have turned stadiums into seas of Philippine flags and turned tennis matches into celebrations of identity. They have shown that the Eala effect is not just about one player. It's about a community finding its voice on the world's biggest stages. Jessica Pegula, the world no. 3. Acknowledged the phenomenon. Filipino fans are insane, Pegula said after her DC Open final loss to Eala. They're just excited to be there. There's just so much excitement. The WTA has a choice to make. It can continue to rely on traditional draws, Grand Slam champions, top seeds, players who fill stadiums in Europe and North America, and watch the empty seats multiply. Or it can embrace the movement that has transformed the sport in 2026. A community of over 10 million Filipinos who have proven they will travel anywhere to watch their hero compete. Alex Eala has already proven she can fill a stadium. The 21-year-old has beaten 10 top 10 opponents. She has won her first WTA title. She has reached the 4th round of Wimbledon. And she has done it all with the weight of a nation on her shoulders. What would you do if you had become the biggest draw in tennis without winning a Grand Slam? For Alex Eala, the answer was simple. She would stay focused on the game. She would let the phenomenon unfold around her. And she would keep proving that the girl with ruffled socks and light-up shoes had earned every single fan who packed those stadiums. Because she knew that the empty seats that had shocked the WTA weren't a warning, they were an opportunity, and she was ready to fill them. 1.